see him up there. Oh, he sent us car.
Awesome.
All right. Welcome to the Everyday Warrior podcast, where our usual host, Mike Sorelli, is suntanning his taint somewhere. Or I don't know where he is. I don't know where he's at.
Is that a real thing? Are people sunning their taint to increase testosterone and
why people do
I think
stuff?
It just looks better.
I don't know.
Well,
it looks better for your friends.
Well, the one thing is in yoga where you flip your legs over the top and you kind of get into that back bend position. I think that's at least what I'm picturing people doing, like just laying on your back, kicking your legs over. We used to call it brown eye to the sky, which is what my high school football coach used to call it.
I don't want to picture it at all. Let's move on. So
picture it, Parsley.
We got BJ over here, Big John Welbourn. How you doing, buddy?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Your taint's well tanned.
Yes, I do it. It's called sunning.
Yeah,
the butthole.
Our NFL veteran.
We had an interesting conversation.
I think veteran's the right way to go.
Well, I played 10 years.
Yeah,
and I fought many wars, so technically I'm a veteran.
Yeah,
in the trenches.
I mean, I think an NFL veteran is like
they're
right
like
sound.
imagining wars in costumes.
Yeah,
in the trenches. But no, that was an interesting thing. I didn't realize that you had to have 20 years to be considered a veteran Navy SEAL
retired.
Retired.
Yeah, and so technically, I'm not actually retired either, so that needs to be corrected. I was in for 19 years, so there's a story behind that. And we got Judd.
I tried to get to 20, and they threw me the fuck out.
We got Judson Kauffman here, our underachiever, who's going to row across the most dangerous passage in the ocean here in a few months.
We'll see.
How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, doing great.
Yeah,
thanks.
Training going well.
Yeah, John here has got us loaded up with some pretty hardcore training. My Whoop tells me that I'm in the red today.
Yeah.
So got a long way to go.
Yeah, I need to
be
sit
in the
down.
red for the whole trip, I think.
Well, I'd like to talk to the lady that we were on the call with.
Yeah,
and kind of understand, like, is there like a load this? So I kind of designed, obviously, training. We're just doing basic strength training, but there's also 2 to 4 hours, it should be 4 hours before, 4 hours after. We have to do our conditioning work. So I'm trying to vary between the C2, some outside ruck stuff, and then obviously some echo bike. But then, like, what's the appropriate load? Because obviously, like, we can't just go here. It's got to be like, it's got to go.
Iron Maiden, caning, whatever. The beat down. Well, let's bring on the man of the hour, Kegan Gill. How are you doing, buddy?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good. So I met Kegan through a mutual healthcare practitioner. He was out here doing some hyperbarics and working with NUX and one of my doctor friends out here, Eleanor Womack, and got to meet this remarkable young man for lunch. And honestly, to this day, Kegan, I've thought about it every day since we had the conversation. That is the most amazing story I've ever heard in my life. Hate to put you on the spot like that, but first of all, I want to clear up something. I know in our show notes we had you down as a Navy pilot. Is that correct? I thought you were a Marine pilot, and I messed that up.
No, you're right. And thank you for the massive compliment coming from yourself and the people you've worked with in your line of work. That's a massive compliment. So thank you.
Yeah. So
just for the listeners, for this guy to say this is the most amazing story he's ever heard,
because I've already heard some pretty amazing Parsley stories.
A lot. So Doc Parsley was a SEAL. He's been a doctor. He's been around the block a few times.
And y'all are going to agree with me. You're going to be floored. So Kegan, I'm building up. I'm going to try to keep the pressure off you. So I'll give the wave top and see if you can correct anything that I'm inaccurate with. But from what I remember on our story, you were pulling about 7 Gs. At the speed of sound, you ejected, which is a 0% survivable event. Your body was destroyed. You hit the water. You drowned. Were saved, brought back to life several times, and then there's a whole life story that goes on past that. But is that the basics of that story, right?
That's the nutshell of it.
Okay.
but I'd be happy to get into more detail.
Let's
with
talk
you.
about just tell it to me the way you did when we were having that delicious barbecue at the county line. No sponsor there. Great view. Great queso fries with pulled pork. Anyway,
You got it.
Kegan, let's hear it, man. So tell us about the day. I remember setting up. There's the feeling of the day around the sharks and the weather and what y'all were doing, the danger, what was involved, and just like let's run us through the
You
events.
got it.
Of the physical destruction of your body.
Yeah, so I was a junior officer in VFA 143, the Puke and Dog, stationed at NAS Oceana out of Virginia Beach. I'd been in the squadron for about 8 months. Before that, I'd done 3.5 years of flight training in the Navy to get to that spot. So I was a winged aviator. But as you quickly find out when you show up at a fighter squadron, I'm sure it's probably similar in the SEALs. You guys get your trident, we get our wings, and we show up and we realize we still don't know anything.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. You think you're good, and you're not even confident.
You
Yeah.
never
Right. So, drinking out of the fire hose for the previous 8 months in my active squadron. And I was finally starting to feel like maybe I was starting to get my head wrapped around some of this stuff. Getting ready for the flight that day. We were going to go out and do some air-to-air refueling. And then with that fuel, with a little extra airspace and time, we were going to set up and do air combat maneuvering or basic fighter maneuvering, BFM, which is dogfighting, which is probably what people think of when they think fighter pilot, two jets trying to shoot each other down. So
Like the Top Gun movie.
yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
And I was really excited. It was my favorite thing to do in the jet. That and casts and low levels. I mean, we were fortunate the F-18 Super Hornet is sort of the jack of all trades, master of none. So as a pilot, you get to do this wide array of different mission sets. But because of that, you never really feel like you get terribly proficient in any one thing before you're moving on to something else. But getting ready for the day, I'm in the ready room, and my buddy Fisty is at the SDO desk, so standing duty, which is all the pilots run through that and change that duty out day to day. But he's answering the radio, the phone, coordinating the flight schedule. And as a joke, he put up on the whiteboard behind him all these GPS tagged sharks that are out on the Atlantic Ocean underneath the airspace we were going to be utilizing that day. And it just so happened there was a 16-foot, 3,500-pound great white shark named Mary Lee. So basically like Jaws' mom hanging out in the ocean. On top of that, the water temperature that day at the buoy out there was about 37 degrees Fahrenheit with below freezing air temps. So extremely cold conditions. And we joked it would be a terrible day to eject. So I'm getting ready to go out on the flight. I put on a dry suit because we're going to be operating in that area. Get out, do some air-to-air refueling. That all goes smooth. And then we set up for some dogfighting, some BFM. My flight lead had 15 plus years of experience, really knew what he was doing. He was a Top Gun weapons school graduate. And I was going to basically step in the ring with Mike Tyson and get my ass kicked. But that's, as you know, that's the way the Navy does their training. You jump in over your head constantly and you figure out how to swim real quick that way. So we set up, we did several sets of BFM, which is sort of like a round in martial arts. You fight until there's a clear winner or loser, which in this case was consistently me getting my ass shot. But we set up.
What does that acronym mean? What's VFM?
Basic fighter maneuvering is the acronym. I don't know why they call it basic. There's not anything terribly basic about it, but
the same reason basic sciences are basic sciences through your PhD. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. But there's a lot going on when you're doing that. You're flying the aircraft, you're max performing the jet. You're under heavy G load. You can feel all that force. Your body weighs, like, depending on your body weight, somewhere between 1,300 and 1,500 pounds. Just your head and helmet weigh about 20 pounds when you're under that G. So you're under high physical stress, and you're also doing a lot. You're operating aircraft weapon systems, defensive systems. You're flying the jet. You're looking over your head. You're trying to keep sight of the other guy. You're operating multiple radios. So it's very easy to get a helmet fire, as they call it. just so much going on that your brain just wants to explode. But we
Are
did
you in a
several.
Super Hornet?
I flew the F-18 Echo Super Hornet, which is a single seat variant of that Super Hornet.
Okay.
If you've seen the new Top Gun Maverick, it's the same jet featured in that film, the new one.
Cool.
But we set up, we did several sets, and we got to where we hit Joker fuel, which means we were basically out of fuel, but we had just enough fuel for one more set before we hit bingo, meaning we had to head straight back to Oceana. We set up for the fight a little lower and a little faster than we typically would. We were down at 12,500 feet, about 450 knots. So I'm still over 2 nautical miles straight up in the air, which meant the ground was an immediate concern of mine. So we called the 3, 2, 1 fights on. I pitched the jet in at my flight lead. He pitched his jet in at me, and we came to a high speed merge, meaning the paths of our jet crossed within about 500 feet of each other, just hauling ass. And I had just gotten my qualifications with the Jehemix helmet, which is sort of this big space age visor. Wherever you look with your head, your weapon systems can train along with your flight displays. So I could see my altitude and airspeed. But just like any piece of new gear, it takes some time to get used to it before it becomes intuitive. And just that little bit of distraction that helmet provided, I lost track of my airspeed. And I didn't realize in just a few seconds since we started that fight that I had put on a significant amount of airspeed. Not fully realizing that, I rolled the jet inverted and I continued my pull down towards the ocean in a split S maneuver, meaning I basically dove down, straight down at the ocean with the intention of coming back up to take a shot at my adversary. So as I did that, I pulled the jet, the stick all the way back in my lap, and I pulled about 7.5 Gs. So like I said earlier, you know, just my head and helmet at 1 G weighed about 20 pounds, let's say, for rough math, and I'm at nearly 8 Gs. So that means I have about 150, 160 pounds just on my head, and you're looking all over, and there's a saying that's lose sight, lose the fight. So I'm looking outside, trying to keep my adversary in sight. And as I'm doing that, I get to about bullseye nose low, so pointed straight at the ocean. And all of a sudden, I feel the jet ease up. I feel that force that's acting all over my body ease, which is not the feeling you want to have when you're pointed straight down at the ocean. And so what had happened, I didn't realize this all at the time, but there's a system on the jet called the G bucket. And there was bombs programmed into the flight control or into the software of the jet, telling the aircraft that there were bombs on the wings that weren't actually there. And so the jet, thinking it was protecting itself from an overstressed condition as I hit transonic, which is right before you break the speed of sound. And so it automatically overrode my control input. So imagine going around a sharp corner in a high performance sports car and then having the steering wheel kick back.
It's like that damn adaptive speed control on my on my auto, or what's the, not autopilot, on your cruise control on your car when somebody gets in front of you and your brakes shut down. And so you're just losing all your power all of a sudden. Yeah.
Sometimes the automation's nice, and there's definitely some awesome features of the flight control system. But in this case, the computer essentially outsmarted itself and put us in a stuck dive at the ocean. And so we're basically just diving at the ocean as this jet eases from about 7.5 Gs down to around 4 to 4.5 Gs, which greatly decreased that turn performance of the jet. And in the little bit of time I had to figure this out, I mean, this all just happens in a few seconds. I pulled the throttle to idle. I put out the speed brake in a desperate attempt to try to slow down. But before I know it, the ocean is just rushing up at me, and I get this overwhelming ground rush as that ocean just fills up my view. And when it got very clear that there was no other option but to get the hell out of there if I was going to live, I pulled the ejection handle. And when I pulled that ejection handle, I was at 695 miles per hour, which is 95% the speed of sound. I was at 2,000 feet above the ocean, 2 seconds before impacting the ocean in the jet. And a normal ejection is pretty violent. People get their spines compressed. You get flail injuries from your arms whipping about. And that's ejection somewhere in the neighborhood of around 200 knots. I'm over 600 knots. And the effect of that was just devastating my body. It was the equivalent of hitting a freaking explosion with my body. If you stick your arm out a car window going down the highway at about 70 miles per hour, you felt about 1/100th the force that was acting on my body from that parasitic drag. So basically, just an explosion. And at that force, it ripped my helmet off, gave me a TBI. It smashed my face up. I broke my C1. I broke my left scapula, bilateral humerus fracture. So both my upper arms from flailing. I mean, my arms are just ragdolling. My right humerus tore through my brachial artery in my right arm, causing rapid internal bleeding. My left forearm shattered the radius and ulna, also severing the median nerve. My spinal compression and my arms flailing did serious damage to my brachial plexus, which is the nerve that essentially controls a lot of your upper body. My legs were flailing so violently that the steel-toed boots on my feet essentially acted like maces, smashing open my tibia fibulas in both lower legs, shattering. Chunks of my bone are falling out. I ejected so fast that a lot of the flight gear on my survival vest ripped off. My dry suit shredded off of me. I mean, this force almost ripped the clothing right off of my body. And by the time the ejection sequence initiated and completed to get me out of the aircraft, it takes about 0.4 seconds. At that point, I was at 1,500 feet above the ocean. A second and a half from impacting the ocean, that parachute had enough time to deploy and slow me so that I didn't die on impact with the ocean. And within seconds, I smashed into the water, and that 37-degree Fahrenheit water, for anybody who's into cold plunging or for Navy SEALs, for what you guys probably do for fun on the weekends, like, that's freaking cold water. And it felt like needles on my skin as it filled my dry suit. As my head went under, you can feel that sort of brain freeze feeling. And the parachute that had just saved my life sunk underneath the ocean current and started to drag me down. We have a system on the parachute that connects to our harness, our parachute harness, called the SMURF. And what the SMURF is supposed to do is when it goes into salt water, it sets off a little saltwater activated explosive. And that's supposed to disconnect your parachute automatically, because upper body injuries are so common in jet ejections. It's very common. You can't reach up and manually disconnect. So that system failed. And so now I'm attached to that parachute, which had just saved my life seconds ago. It now sunk underneath that ocean current, and it started to drag me under. And
it's important to remind the audience at this point that both of your arms are broken. Your right humerus is going through your brachial artery. Your scapula shattered. Both your legs are broken. Your neck's broken. So you essentially can't move, and you're bleeding like a sieve. Your dry suit's wide open, and you're bleeding into this 37-degree water with sharks swimming around you, essentially.
Yeah, and basically the worst case scenario, nightmare for any pilot of what could happen. And so I started to just get drug under. And for anybody who's ever been held under by a big wave or done drown proofing, when you need a breath of air and you can't get it, it's a pretty terrible feeling. And I inhaled a lot of water. Fortunately, my life preserver unit around my neck automatically inflated, and it provided me enough buoyancy that in between the parachute pulling me under and the open ocean smashing into me, I could occasionally get up and get a breath of air, scream for help. In the meantime, my flight lead saw my parachute open. He dropped a mark for my GPS position, and he spotted a fishing vessel about a mile away. He got down over that fishing vessel. He tried to reach him on Maritime Guard on the radio. They weren't responding. So he got down really low and really fast, and he thumped the bow of their vessel, meaning he freaking flew over the bow of their boat really quick, which got their attention. He got them over to my spot where I was at, which was very fortunate because I'm just a little dark head bobbing around in the ocean at this point. My beacon malfunctioned, so all I was a dark head. My helmet was gone, which has reflective tape on it, and I'm getting pulled under. So had that boat gotten out over near my position, I would have drifted off into the ocean and nobody would have found me. And fortunately, my flight lead was able to do that all on essentially fumes of gas before heading back.
Oh my God.
ATC coordinated with him on his flight back. They got more aircraft overhead. They got the Coast Guard coming out to my position and 2 Navy H-60 Seahawk helicopters coming to my position. The first helicopter that showed up about an hour and a half later. In the meantime, I'd been just getting drowned alive. I was in and out of consciousness. I don't know how I didn't drown or bleed to death at this point or get eaten by a freaking Mary Lee who's probably smelled my blood
What
in the
could have
water.
been the cold water? Like,
And they,
Nothing he's saying is survivable. So I have no input on this whatsoever other than wow. So just, yeah.
And so one of the H-60 Seahawk helicopters shows up. Their rescue swimmer jumps into the water thinking I'm on the fishing vessel, which I actually wasn't. And fortunately, another H-60 Seahawk helicopter was on scene at that point, and their pilot got eyes on me first, and they got their rescue swimmer into the water. And fortunately, that rescue swimmer got down to my position. He hooked into my titanium D-ring on my harness, and he said that force of the parachute dragged both of us underwater. I mean, he's a rescue swimmer at peak physical condition. And even with him swimming as hard as he could not fight the force of that parachute as it dragged us under. Fortunately, he was able to cut loose all the paracord, get me onto the helicopter with him. And on the helicopter,
cut the cord?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Was he using a knife underwater to cut those parachute cords?
Yeah. He had a specialized knife, a hook knife, so
Yep.
it doesn't have a sharp blade exposed, but then he can do it without accidentally.
That dude's
cutting
a
me
hero.
up.
You bought him like cases and cases of beer, I
That's
guess.
not an easy task right there.
Yeah, lots of
Yeah,
tequila
you know.
shots for that man. His
Jeez.
call sign's Cheech, and he's actually an Army sniper now. He switched over.
Oh, nice.
But I owe my life to him and everybody involved in the rescue. They got me out of the helicopter. At that point, I was coding multiple times. I died several times on my way to the hospital, but they were doing everything they could to keep me alive. One of the crew members had started to eat his lunch on the way to the just before they got the call. It was a big meatball marinara sub, and he kind of like wrapped it up and threw it in the corner of the helicopter when they got this rescue call. And on the flight to the hospital, that meatball sub had broken loose and gotten all over everything. So I was just covered in marinara and meatball. And I mean, I was in bad shape, but to make matters worse, it looked like I had freaking gore coming out of my body. So when they got me to the hospital, they had to explain to the staff there as they're getting me on a gurney, like, hey, he's in bad shape, but that's just my lunch, you know? So they get me into the hospital. They start doing everything to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I mean, they took my core body temperature at that point, and my core body temperature was at 87 degrees Fahrenheit. So I should have been dead.
And you're supposed to die, for reference to the audience, you're supposed to die somewhere around 93, 94 degrees. That's supposed to be unsurvivable. So yet another miracle.
Yeah, I mean, just add it to the list of miracles along the way here. But they took my core body temperature, and that actually, they said, saved me from bleeding to death. Had my dry suit not ripped open, I would have bled to death warm and toasty in my dry suit way before anybody got there. But that cold water constricted my blood flow that was pouring out of my brachial artery and both my open leg fractures. They started treating me for hypothermia. I had kidney failure from rhabdomyosis. Basically, all the extremity damage had just overwhelmed my kidneys with all that breakdown of tissue. I had blood transfusion. They gave me a bunch more blood. They pumped water out of my lungs. And once I was semi-stable, they induced a coma. And I spent the next week undergoing over a dozen trauma surgeries, from fasciotomies on all 4 extremities, which saved all 4 extremities from essentially being amputated. Otherwise, I would have been.
So for the audience, I'd like to explain that real quick. Your muscles are wrapped into tissue called fascia that doesn't really stretch well, and so if you bleed too much into the muscle and it's held in by the fascia and the blood pressure keeps building up in there, you essentially kill all of that tissue. It essentially becomes one big blood clot and necrotic. And so lots of people, people can get overuse injuries.
Is that like compartment syndrome?
Yeah. So
it's basically like body compartment syndrome.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he has compartment syndrome in
His
all
whole
4
body.
limbs,
All 4, his whole body.
Yeah. Everything except his torso. Yeah. And and people run marathons and overuse that and get too much blood in there, and they have to have fasciotomies. But so fasciotomy across your entire body, again, like just an insult that would devastate almost everybody, everyone's physiology. But yeah, keep going, Kegan.
Yeah, I mean, I think what really saved me in a large part was, I mean, a lot of things, but as far as the physicality of it all, fortunately I'm a short guy. At that time I was about 5'7", 180 pounds. I was into Olympic lifting and CrossFit. So I was short and stocky and strong. And I think that saved me in a lot of ways, undergoing all that trauma. And anyways, I spent a week. They rebuilt my skeleton. I had intermedial rods put in my humerus in both upper arms, both my tibia and my lower legs. So these big titanium rods inserted into the core of the bones. My left forearm was put back
like
together.
Wolverine.
Yeah. If you see my X-ray, it looks like freaking Wolverine. Although with the budget cuts, they skipped out on the blades, but that's all right. But yeah, it's almost like science fiction if you see my X-rays now. But once they got me back together, they started to try to get me out of that induced coma after the week, and I just wasn't coming to. And so I spent the next week in a non-induced coma. A lot of my squadron mates came in to see me. My family's there, and they're all just sort of, the morale was really low until somebody kind of piped up and was like, he's a scrappy motherfucker. He'll be fine. And that became my call sign. They shortened it down to SMURF. And because it's the Navy, you have to have a politically correct cover story, which is because I'm a short guy that turned blue from hypothermia. But now you know the real story behind it. After another week in that non-induced coma, the lights just finally came back on. I woke up just completely dazed and confused.
Hold on, sorry to interrupt you again, but
No.
I believe the medical staff was telling your colleagues and your family that you were toast, right? That even if you came out of this, you're going to be brain dead. You're never going to walk again. Like all the stupid shit doctors usually say, right?
Yeah. I mean, they were just trying to prepare them for the worst, I guess. And fortunately they were wrong. And as I came to, I thought the blanket over me was made out of lead and was tied down because I could not budge, but it was because I was paralyzed. My whole body, my arms and legs were all vacuum sealed. I had these huge fasciotomy wounds. I had nearly 200 staples and sutures holding me all together. I looked like freaking Frankenstein. And the doctors eventually came in and they said, hey, here's kind of what happened. At this point, I'm still so mentally out of it between all the pain meds and the brain injury. Like I did not understand why I was there or why I was in the hospital. I even remember telling some of my buddies in the squadron, hey, will you guys go get a wheelchair and just get me out of here? I'll be fine. And they're like, no, dude, you're gonna be here for a while. But the docs eventually came in. I don't remember what medical staff it was, if it was a physician or the nurses, but they came in and they started saying, hey, here's the reality. You're never going to walk again. You're never going to use your arms again. Your flying career is over. And, we're not trying to be mean. We're just trying to lay it out there. And in the back of my mind, I was just sort of like, I'm going to prove you all wrong. And every day it just became my mission to just do anything I could. And I poured all of my energy and focus into just trying to wiggle like my hips a little bit. After a couple of weeks, one of the nurses came into my room and I was able to scoot to the bottom of my bed, and she came in and I was sitting up at the bottom of the bed, and she was taken back the fact that I was sitting up. They then transferred me down to up to Richmond, Virginia, to the Polytrauma Center there at the VA hospital. And I spent the next 3 months undergoing every kind of therapy known to man, from vision therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, kinesiotherapy, aquatherapy, recreational therapy, you name it. Like they were throwing everything at me, as including a massive list of pharmaceutical drugs. I was on a concoction of oxycodone, OxyContin, tramadol, trazodone, amitriptyline, and massive doses of gabapentin. And
Jesus Christ.
Little by little there, I relearned how to start using my legs. I relearned how to start using my arms. And after 3 months, I could get around on a walker well enough that they let me head back to Virginia Beach, where I continued outpatient therapy, underwent more surgeries, and it didn't look good still. I mean, I had very little function, but I had some friends start to
How
work.
many surgeries at this point are you estimated? Are we like around 20 surgeries at this point?
I think 16 procedures at that point. I've had a few more since, but I think around 16 different surgical procedures. And I was also addicted to massive amounts of all these medications they were giving me for pain. And
Yeah.
And actually,
well, obviously you had an oxycodone deficiency. Your oxycodone deficiency is probably caused by your oxycodone gland failing because of the injection.
Yeah, here, have some of this. This will help complicate things for you.
Yeah.
And actually, the thing that
of humor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Looked like it.
the thing that actually helped the thing that actually helped the pain, I had severe nerve pain, but they actually came in, this doc that didn't even look like a doc, just kind of like a long-haired hippie guy came in, and he had a bag of glucose and a little syringe, and it was called prolotherapy. And he injected these little bumps of essentially sugar water subcutaneously all around the areas where I had nerve pain. And within 10 minutes, and I don't know, maybe $10 of supplies, the severe nerve pain reduced by at least 90% and permanently never came back, at least to that level of discomfort. And it didn't take any drugs. It was just freaking sugar water. But little by
I've had
little,
extensive prolotherapy, and the prolo works great. I mean, I had a tear in a ligament and a tear in a tendon, and they injected it with the prolo, and it healed up just fine. So no, I mean, prolotherapy is pretty amazing stuff, and it's just sugar water causes inflammation.
yeah.
It's been around forever.
Forever.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that that wasn't the first step, I don't understand.
Yeah, medicine's lost. We're gonna bring that out later. How bad medicine treated you?
They actually do a better version with B vitamins. So they do a prolo with B vitamins that actually works dramatically better than just the sugar water. So
yeah. All right, hit us up, man. Keep going.
Wait, Kegan, sorry. What year was this?
This was the ejection was January 15th, 2014. So it's been about 9 years at this point, a little over 9 years.
Okay.
So I'm in bad shape. I ended up having to go through an extensive FNAV, which is a Field Naval Aviator Evaluation Board, where they looked at all the information from the aircraft, the crash, what I had done. I mean, they dove into my life. They wanted to know everything down to my diet before the ejection, everything. And I spent several months going through that process, which all culminated with me coming in through the FNAB. I believe I was still using a cane to get around at this point, but I'm dressed in my summer white uniform, and I had to go stand tall in front of an admiral after months of investigation. And I come into the boardroom, and it's sort of a table like you guys are sitting at there, this long wooden table. And flanked on both sides of it are about a dozen other naval aviators. And they had done some preliminary questioning of me. But at this point, we're all standing there waiting for the admiral. As he walks in, we rise to attention. He tells us all to sit down. I sit down at the opposite side of this long wooden table from the admiral. And the only question he asked me is he looks across the table and he goes, "Lieutenant Gill, are you fearless?" And I took a moment to just think about what I was going to say. And I said, I don't remember everything from the ejection, sir, but I'm certain what little bit of padding there is on an ejection seat was puckered up inside me real tight. And he didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't say a word. He just stood up and walked out of the room. And so I'm thinking, oh man, maybe that didn't go so well. But shortly thereafter, one of the other senior ranking officers called me into his room, had me sit down, and he handed me a lifesaver, a little mint. And he said, "Congratulations, you're going to head back and fly again." And while, I was partially responsible for what had happened by making the split-second decision to maneuver the jet nose low at that airspeed, there was a lot more to it. And in particular, that flight control system overriding my inputs has killed or caused near mishaps of several pilots much more senior and more experienced than I prior to my mishap. And since then, I personally know at least one guy who has had, who no longer is with us because of that same system overriding his inputs at the worst possible time. So I was fortunate to get the chance to go back and fly, but that gave me enough motivation to keep pushing ahead with my therapy. And while the clinical therapy was helpful at a certain level, what really helped me was I had friends working with me outside of the clinic. I had friends taking me out surfing. I could barely put on a wetsuit because my arms were still so weak. But we went out in Outer Banks and we were paddling out into like 10 to 12 foot surf, just getting I was just getting smashed. But just popping back up to the surface after getting held down, it was like overcoming those fears. My buddy Spicoli took me out downhill mountain biking.
Jeff?
Not Jeff. His call sign is after him.
Mr. Hand.
His name's Aaron Thurber. He's actually deployed right now. Good dude. But they got me out. You know, my buddies got me back out, hanging out at Chick's Oyster Bar in Virginia Beach. They got me out, just hanging out and rebuilding my confidence and rebuilding my body and my soul at a certain level. I managed to overcome that prescription drug addiction on my own. Against the advice of the pain management team, I just started to wean myself off everything. I weaned myself off just one at a time. First the amitriptyline, then the tramadol, then the trazodone, then the oxy, which those were uncomfortable and caused a lot of anguish for a while. But the one that was the most painful was the one that wasn't even supposed to be habit forming. It was gabapentin or Neurontin, which they told me when I started taking it, this is the safer alternative to oxycodone. So we're going to give you a bunch of it. And I think I was on like 2,400 milligrams of that stuff a day, taking these big horse pills like 4 times a day. That stuff took me months to wean myself off of.
Are you suggesting that the pharmaceutical companies provided misinformation?
No.
I was going to say 2 things. One, don't ever have the seafood shower at Chick's. The most sick I've ever been. I've never thrown up that much. I got a bad oyster at Chick's, so I can't walk into that place.
Not high quality food.
No. And then the other one is our dog got lymphoma, and they gave him gabapentin, and like we give him 1 a day, and if we don't give it right on time, he starts to whine, and I'm always like, what is in that gabapentin? As soon as you said it, I'm like, so we give our dog.
Well, and everybody knows how hard it is to get off benzodiazepines, things like Valium, Xanax, and then sleeping pills, Ambien, Lunesta. Those are all working on the GABA system. That's what nearly killed Jordan Peterson getting off of Valium.
Yeah.
He spent a year in recovery. So messing around with GABA receptors is a really bad idea. And that's how all sleep drugs work, but that's a soapbox. Now I'm pushing this along because as you told me right about now, you said this is where the Disney story ends. And now the really emotional, hard, amazing, unbelievable stuff it's coming, and we got to get to this. So you got back into the jets flying, man, and fill us in after that.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it took 2 years, but I was able to max out the Navy's physical fitness. I was performing well again. I was all back. I had to undergo all sorts of assessment and get all sorts of waivers, but I was back flying Super Hornets again. And I got stationed with VFA 136 Nighthawks out in Lemoore, California. And it seemed like, you know, a miracle had happened, so many miracles. And I was back on top of the world. I went on a flight in Tyndall Air Force Base. We were doing a live fire weapons exercise. I got to fire an AIM-9 Mike heat-seeking missile at a drone. And then I got to go off and do some dissimilar air combat training, which is BFM, against an F-22 Raptor from an Air Force squadron that was there off. These guys are out of Hawaii, off Oahu, flying Raptors, which has probably got to be the best flying gig ever conceived. But anyways, I came back from that flight, and in the debrief, I was watching my tapes, and I realized I had these huge gaps in my memory from the missile shoot, which was concerning. I remember fighting the Raptor very vividly. It was one of the coolest things I ever did, seeing that thing with its directional thrust. But I went back home that night. I just thought maybe I just needed to sleep it, or not back home, but back to the hotel room we were staying at. And I couldn't sleep. I went in. I was just on duty the next day, so I wasn't flying, just answering radios and phones and coordinating the flight schedule. And as the day progressed, I just got feeling worse and worse. And that night I got back to my hotel room. My anxiety was spiked. My insomnia was there. Like, I was trying to set my phone for the alarm for the next morning because I had to get up and fly. and I couldn't do the mental math to figure out what time I needed to get up in the morning or how to set my alarm. There had been a number of issues with decompression sickness in the Super Hornet. We had a problematic pressurization system in both the Hornets and the Super Hornets that caused rapid decompression. And for divers out there, when you get decompression sickness, you can get it in your joints, which is type 1 DCS, which are little bubbles that form and cause pain. And there's type 2 DCS, which is when those little bubbles can form in your brain, which can do everything from causing symptoms like a stroke or aneurysm to even killing you. So we suspected maybe I got one of these bubbles in my brain. They rushed me to Mayport Dive Base, where I underwent a night of hyperbaric therapy. I started to feel a little better, but when I got back to Lemoore, they said, hey, you got to go see the flight doc, which after overcoming all of that and all the waivers, the last thing I wanted to have to do was go to medical, because that typically doesn't end well in those kind of fields. And anyways, I went in reluctantly. I didn't want to hurt or kill anybody or injure myself. And I knew something was wrong. I still couldn't sleep. I didn't have any concentration, focus. My memory was shot. And I went in, and before long, I had a delayed onset PTSD diagnosis. And of course, one of the first options they went with was more drugs. And the last thing I wanted to do was take more pharmaceutical drugs after my experience of withdrawals. But they painted that as the only picture, the only solution to maybe have a chance to get back to flying. Retrospectively,
What year was this?
This was 2017.
Okay.
And retrospectively, I had classical symptoms of an unresolved TBI or brain injury. But unfortunately, everything got bit off on this PTSD diagnosis, and they started throwing a bunch of drugs at it. And it worked initially to mask the symptoms. That the drug they gave me was called quetiapine or Seroquel, which at low doses is used as a sleep aid. It's typically used
It's an
as
antipsychotic. Yeah. Okay.
So it's a heavy-duty psychotropic medication. And as time went on, I started to become paranoid and extremely hypervigilant. Started to feel like I was in the Truman Show, like everybody was an actor. Everything was fake, and everybody was watching me. As it degraded, I started to become full-up psychotic, and I went into psychoses. I started to think the government was hunting me. I started to hide from the windows in my house. It was I was having panic attacks just trying to go to the grocery store. I stopped eating and drinking because I thought I was being poisoned by the government, which in fact I was, but it was in the pharmaceutical drug period.
Well, don't drink the tap water.
I just got worse and worse. My wife had just had our newborn little baby boy, and she's taking care of our newborn, and she's trying to take care of me, who's just out of my mind. And I remember one night I was just so depressed and dark and twisted from everything that was going on. I felt like I had let down my squadron, everybody who had faith in me. And I kept a Glock 19 in my end table by my bed. And I started to think, what's the barrel going to feel like on my teeth? What's the gun oil going to taste like in my mouth? And the only thing that kept me from going through with it is I looked over and I saw my wife and my little baby boy sleeping next to me, and I didn't want to wake him up. So I closed the end table and I tried to go back to sleep. But I spent a long time in bad places. Sometimes the psychoses were really exciting. I thought my wife was Carrie Matheson from the show Homeland. She kind of looks like her. So I thought she was this secret agent that had been sent to save me. But before long, I had to go through a medical board to be processed out of the military, which is essentially the bureaucratic equivalent of the Indiana Jones Temple of Doom. I mean, the whole process is riddled with booby traps to derail veterans trying to get help through that, to get a medical retirement. Through appeals and a lot of fighting, even with a very clear-cut case, I was eventually medically retired and moved back to northern Michigan with my family. And they kept upping the.
Didn't they? Sorry to interrupt. Didn't you tell me that they tried to accuse you of malingering and that you were doing this so you could get out and fly commercial?
Yeah, yeah. At the board, they accused me that I was.
Because there was nothing evidence that could have caused this.
Apparently, they didn't even crack open my medical record to see anything that was going on. But I was fortunate to eventually get medically retired. I moved back to northern Michigan with my family, and they continued increasing the dose of Seroquel. And within a few days of them increasing the dose from 300 milligrams a night up to 450 milligrams, which is a heroic dose of that medication. My wife came in. She had found me. I was completely naked. For some reason, I had shaved off my hair in chunks. I'd shaved off my eyebrows. And the only thing I had on was a black plastic garbage bag that I was wearing like a cape, because I thought I was a superhero that was going to go out into the northern Michigan weather dressed like that and fight crime. My wife rushed me to the ER, and there I underwent an intense psychosis. And then I ended up getting transferred to the Battle Creek VA inpatient psych facility. So I was in a psych hospital and completely out of my mind. And the only answer there was just more drugs. And everything there was to force you onto drugs, whether you wanted them or not. I had been voluntarily admitted,
Better
but
living through
they held me
pharmacology.
against my will. And what they were doing to people in there, if you take somebody going through survival training in the military to get an exposure to what it would be like to be a prisoner of war, they do this at SEER school. The things they can do to people is they confine them, they sleep deprive them, they don't give them nutrition, they don't let them go outside. And a lot of the same things that you would do to an enemy combatant to break them, to make them do whatever you want, are the same things that they do to American veterans in the VA inpatient psych facilities. It's a very difficult place to sleep to begin with. There's people yelling and moaning and grumbling and going in and out of psychoses. And then every 15 minutes, they come into your room and they shine a flashlight in your face to make sure you're safe. So you become extremely sleep deprived, requiring more drugs to sleep. The food is just absolutely abysmal. You're getting this nutrient void prison food. There's not really a fresh fruit or vegetable in sight. If you do get a salad, it's just white iceberg lettuce with seed oil crap dressing all over it. So you're just getting awful nutrition. You don't get to go outside hardly at all. Maybe once a week, you get to go out into a concrete fenced in yard. You can't exercise. The water that comes out that you get to drink tastes like it comes from a bottom of an old hot tub, just full of junk. And so a lot of people just end up drinking this artificially sweetened garbage. They pass out Nutter Butters and frickin' Oreos like crazy, but there's just junk that they're feeding you. And I guess you don't go hungry, but you are nutrient deprived at a very deep level.
Yeah,
and
you're
so
still starving.
drugs.
You're just eating plenty.
And if you walk into the place, you might not think it's that bad. You know, it's clean. It's got pictures on the wall. But underneath the surface, it's pretty abysmal, the treatment that they're getting. I spent months. Oh, go ahead.
Didn't you tell me that they brought some lawyers in at this stage? Are you about to get to that?
So I actually planned it.
This fills me with homicidal rage, but
I started to become more lucid in talking to other veterans in there, and there are guys that have been in and out of prison in their struggles, and they all agreed they'd rather be in federal prison than in this inpatient psych facility run by the VA, because the treatment there was better, the food was better, they got to go outside regularly. And so I started to plan an escape. I used my training from SEER school. I started making weapons out of balled up socks. I started gathering food and warm clothes. And my plan was I was going to pull the fire alarm. And when they took us outside, me and the other veterans that wanted to could make a run for it. And I went to execute my plan. And apparently somebody had already tried this trick. And they ended up coming and forcibly injecting me with a medication called Haldol, which is a heavy-duty antipsychotic that they inject into you, which caused me to feel like my skin had insects trying to eat their way out from underneath. I just wanted to rip my skin off and run and scream at the top of my lungs. If you've ever seen a movie or TV show about psych facilities and you see somebody just freaking out like they're undergoing an exorcism and trying to tear their skin off, that's probably because they just got injected with Haldol. But after that, they just started drugging me. And I was drooling on myself literally when they took me into a room to sign a bunch of paperwork. I had no idea what I was signing. The soulless lawyer that was in the room that was supposedly supposed to be representing me ended up, that paperwork stripped me of my constitutional right to bear arms, and it labeled me as permanently mentally defective. So now if I get pulled over by the police, I come up in the law enforcement information network as if I had committed a felony. So I was an American veteran that went in to try to get help through the VA system, and I ended up getting stripped of my constitutional right to bear arms. I ended up getting drugged against my will and confined against my will, and witnessed
And
some pretty.
you're on the no-fly list too, aren't you? Did you tell me you're on the no-fly list?
I'm not on the no-fly list, but it's going to be a serious uphill battle for me to overcome that mental defective label that they put on me.
Right.
So, things seem pretty hopeless. Eventually my family got me out of there, and I started to seek alternative methods of healing. I started really improving my diet as much as possible, getting regular exercise, just being outside helped. And what really turned the tide for me was I read the book How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, and I discovered psychedelic healing. And I underwent a psilocybin mushroom retreat, and that started to change the tide. And to use Michael Pollan's analogy, it was like a fresh snowfall over these ruts of negative emotions that I had been through. And it sort of filled in these gaps. So I had this fresh powder that I could take new lines down the hill on my skis in my life. And little by little, I started to get better. Eventually, I found Heroic Hearts Project, Warrior Angel Foundation, and they started to do a lot of what you do, Doc, which is they actually did a real blood test. They looked at my physiology, and they started to see all these signs of TBI and all the damage and havoc that does to your hormone imbalances. And anybody with imbalanced hormones is going to have a lot of issues, including sleep problems, cognitive dysfunction, mood and dysfunction. And once those things actually finally started to get addressed, along with a psychedelic retreat down to Peru through Heroic Hearts Project, this combination of things really started to turn the tide for me. And I discovered this whole world of alternative modalities that are incredibly effective, yet they're being intentionally suppressed and oftentimes made illegal by the powers of the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah. So when I saw you were out here doing hyperbarics, I know you're working with Dr. Womack for some peptides as well. As you said, you're on hormonal modulation. And I can attest to, if I had met you and not told it, and you'd not told me the story, I would never had any idea anything was ever wrong with you. I mean, you present yourself as completely healthy. You move naturally. You obviously speak naturally, normal affect, all of this stuff. So you seem, to somebody who doesn't know you prior, you seem 100%. Where would you rate yourself as far as, how close to the pre-tragedy Kegan are you?
So in the past about a year and a half, 2 years now, I've gone from drooling on myself, barely able to do the dishes, miserable, depressed, just grumpy to be around, on the verge of divorce, to now I would say I'm about 85%. I certainly have some physical limitations from the nerve damage, some weakness, and mentally I still have issues. It's not exactly a linear path to healing. I have good days and days that are not as good, but at this point I completed the Margie Gessick, which is an ultra distance mountain bike race this past fall. I'm writing a book. I've been motivational speaking and podcasting. And for somebody about a year and a half ago that could barely put a sentence together or barely read a paragraph, the changes that I have seen in this short period of time have been miraculous. And I hope more people can gain access to the modalities that I have been fortunate to come across, and a lot through generosity of folks like Clay and Eleanor Womack that put me in touch with you, Heroic Hearts Project, Warrior Angel Foundation, Defenders of Freedom, the Resiliency Brain Clinic, 62 Romeo. I've been so fortunate. No Fallen Heroes actually just took me this spring down to Costa Rica for Iboga treatment. I've had incredible life-changing experiences for somebody who shouldn't be here at all. And at best case, I should be paralyzed still, but I'm starting to be able to function at a higher level, both physically and mentally, through these alternative modalities and lifestyle changes.
So if I have this right, so we're talking a year and a half, so to late mid 2021 or maybe early 2022. So from 2018 till then, pretty much a battle for your life.
Oh yeah. I mean, from that point that I was going into the psychoses on the psych meds they were giving me for years, I was a mess. I mean, it did serious damage to my family seeing me like that. And we're still healing a lot of that and the aftermath of that. But it's so good to have hope again and see.
Do you have fears that this is going to come back, that maybe this is a temporary and
I really at first, when I started to get better, my wife was incredibly fearful that I was just being manic and that I was going to go back into that cycle again. But it has been long enough at this point that I think that this has been a serious permanent change, and time will tell, but I really believe it was those psych meds that were pushing me over the edge.
I believe that too.
No doubt.
And I've talked to so many other veterans, a lot of guys in the SF community that you've worked with, like yourself, and this is not an uncommon theme. I heard something like 90% of people that get put on these psychotropic medications have severe adverse reactions, but it just gets buried. And unfortunately, no matter how good the people at the VA are, how well-intended the physicians and the staff are, at the very top of that VA system, I've talked to an admiral, a 30-plus year admiral who's a flight surgeon, who's been in the board meetings for policy decisions. And at the end of the day, the pharmaceutical industry sets the policies at the VA.
Right.
And they organize the training, right?
Yeah.
It's the pharmaceutical companies that are educating the doctors at the VA on what to do.
Well, the pharmaceutical industry in a circular manner, we could discuss on another podcast. They actually dictate the training of medical doctors in America. So like what you learn in medical school all the way through internship residencies and further on algorithm.
We should do a podcast on
that's
that.
all dictated by the pharmaceutical industry.
Just to give you how messed up things are, when we were doing all that work at Fort Bragg, one of the issues we were running into was these kids had terrible fatty liver and renal failure and all this because they're consuming pre-workout and drinking 27 Monsters a day. They could not get the GNCs and the supplement set places kicked off a base. And when the 4-star tried to, he got a call from somebody above him that was like, "You can't do this. You have to leave it there. They've paid." And so he's like, "It's killing these kids," and we're basically having to do them. They're like, "Yeah, no, it's not a problem."
So Kegan, I think this might be an obvious answer based on what you said so far, and I know this is a huge what if, and there's a million things you could say, but just to the best of your ability, if knowing what you know now, if you knew someone else was going to go through this, what do you think the military could do to improve this process? Is there any sort of big mover that you could say, well, if they just did this or that would catch 60 or 70% of this or something?
Oh yeah. I mean, for one, I think something that could be incredibly powerful for everybody in these sort of communities, be it SF or the strike fighter community. If guys could come back from a deployment and spend a couple weeks or even just a week where they get one of these reboots, where they actually, like you did in the SEAL community, where you actually get a legitimate blood test and you get those things assessed and you get sort of these tune-ups and you do a lot of preventative measures. And the stress and the hardship of those jobs isn't going to change, but we could do a lot to be proactive, vice wait until things snowball out of control. And then when
we do to our equipment, we can actually do a little PMS, a little preventative maintenance scheduling on our people, just like we do equipment.
And I was fortunate to go to a resiliency brain clinic in Dallas, and then also ATX hyperbarics there in Austin, and do these therapies. And you could have these sort of things on every military base, and the return on investment for keeping the people with experience in. I mean, I don't know how many millions of dollars went into my training or how much it costs to train SF guys, and it's got to be huge. And if you just did a little bit to take care of them, you would extend their careers, you would improve their performance, and it would be all around a win for everybody except for the pharmaceutical industry that is preying on guys.
That's a big exception, man. That's a big exception. There's lots of trillions floating around on that.
I know. Just 2 quick data points to get a SEAL through the pipeline. Just checked into his team. Not even the specialized training you get when you're a new guy in your platoon. That's 1.5 million.
Wow.
Just to get a guy to show up at his SEAL team qualified. And in 2012, a friend of mine was working for an accounting firm in DC, and they audited the VA. And at the end of this 1.5 year long audit, they sat down with the VA administrators and they said, look, your system is so inefficient that if you guys offered every single transitioning veteran either A, continued health care for life through the VA, or B, $1 million check right now, if they all took the $1 million check, we would save money as taxpayers. The VA would save money.
And they said no.
Of course.
Well, a lot of them would piss that money away. So
which would just help the economy and the local drug dealers and hookers.
but then they'd still need medical help.
Yeah, but then you know what? Then at when you spend your last dollar, they're like, and now it's over for you. It's time to lay
At
down.
least you could pay cash for a tattoo instead of financing.
Yeah. So, Kegan, what are you working on now as far as are there any things in the horizon that you would like to do that you don't have access to or don't know maybe problems you have that you don't have solutions to or anything that you're working on that we could help you with or the audience could help you with that anybody could help provide support to organizations that you think are making a big difference for you and other people. Is there anything out there like that you're really moving towards or that you're passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that could be huge is to start pushing for a preventative medicine program for the strike fighter community. I think that community could use it extremely bad, the way that you've kind of stepped into that role for the SEAL community. But anybody out there who could potentially be interested in getting something like that started, I would love to help lead that charge to help my brothers and sisters in that world, in the job and the hardships they go through, the physical stress and the just constant chronic stress they're dealing with. I think that could be incredibly powerful and increase the power of our U.S. military and help them in so many ways. Some other things, if people want to support this sort of stuff, I've already mentioned a number of these organizations, from Warrior Angel Foundation, Vet Solutions, No Fallen Heroes, Defenders of Freedom, 62 Romeo. There's a number of nonprofit organizations out there that are already doing a lot of these things to help. And so supporting those organizations can definitely help veterans on the back end of their military service kind of come out of a dark place, because there are a lot of veterans trapped in a really bad spot, and they're not getting good help. They're going for help, and they're getting pushed into a point where you see these massive suicide rates. So, I feel this calling to help raise awareness about these things and speak about how bad it is. I'm writing a book right now. So maybe you guys will see that on the shelves here before long once it gets through the editing process. But just raising awareness.
Any idea when that book will be out?
I don't want to put a date on it because I don't want to rush it.
Ballpark? I mean, we talking 3 months, 6 months, a year?
The next year or so. Like anything, it always takes a lot longer than you think.
Sure.
I want to really polish it and have it good to go. And I'm also going to have a lot of guides in there and resources, and I can send you guys some links and stuff if you want to put them with this podcast.
For sure. Yeah. Anything you want to put, we'll share. So you shouldn't have survived the ejection. You shouldn't have survived the injuries from the ejection. You shouldn't have survived the parachute pulling you under. You shouldn't have avoided the shark. shouldn't have lived through the helicopter ride. You shouldn't have made it through all your surgeries and your coma. You shouldn't have gotten out of your psychoses.
Doc,
I don't know how many miracles I can count in this.
Doc, I'm you know, and I'm sure Kegan doesn't understand it either, but like, what's the standard of care of just stacking more and more medications on top? Like, he's already on all these like painkillers, then they just start stacking like these psychotropics and like these like this and this. Like is the kind of the standard of the care that there's like some magical combination of all of these drugs that'll make you normal?
No. So the standard is everybody specializes now. And so in their specialty, there's a handful of procedures and a handful of medications that work. And, you know, the neurologist working on his pain isn't the same guy. Orthopedics working with his bones isn't the same person as the psychiatrist working with his PTSD isn't. So everybody's got their mix. And then the internist is the unfortunate soul who has to figure out what out of these 17 drugs is causing the current side effect. And then they're going to try to put some other drug in there to block the side effect of that. And then, and what it truly is hubris. It's the unwillingness to accept that you don't know what the hell is going on. And it's the unwillingness to say, you know what, this guy isn't getting better. We've done something wrong. Let's rethink everything we've done from day one. Like, if we can pull him off of everything, or like, let's get him down to 2 drugs and then see what we absolutely need to do. And then there's a lot of medical legal challenges. I mean, he's alluded several times to what I did to the SEAL teams, but that wasn't popular. You know, that destroyed my career. I was investigated and I was in a lot of trouble for a lot of time just trying to do quasi alternative things like IV vitamins. That was voodoo medicine. And so practicing outside of the standard of care and medicine, you lose your license. And all it takes is like, I could have my patients could have orders of magnitude better outcomes than my colleagues. And all of my patients could love me, but some physician somewhere could say, Doc Parsley isn't practicing standard of care. And then they could take me to court and they could put a couple of Harvard white-haired guys with wide-rimmed glasses and their white coats on. And they'd say, did Doc Parsley follow the standard of care? And they'd say, no. Doc Parsley loses his license. Doc Parsley gets sued for a bunch of money. Doc Parsley can possibly go to jail and like have criminal charges put against him. So nobody wants to step on each other's toes. Nobody wants to take off the medication that the other guy put on. And once somebody's been taking something for several months, nobody wants to say, well, let's pull them off of that and try over. They just say, well, let's add more of this. Let's add this to cover the side effects of that. And it becomes an impossible task. It's not manageable. They just try to pretend like it is. Maybe with AI, they can get closer with this, but obviously this, my poorly presented joke earlier, none of this is a pharmaceutical deficiency. The ideal thing is to get everybody off of medications, but what the medical community thinks to do is how can we add more medications to cover up this, or add better medications or something like that, instead of like, what can we do to improve the root cause of this? Where I was going with my questions, all these miracles, I've lost count. Let's call it a dozen. Were you a spiritual man before? Has this made you spiritual? Is there a big component of that to you? Is that important to you? And you don't have to say anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, but it just calls out to me that you got to feel blessed over this. I mean, you just got to feel like somebody's looking out for you.
I mean, before all of this, I was sort of like a dog looking at the moon. I suspected there was something bigger going on that we couldn't see, but I didn't understand it. But through everything that has happened, through the trauma, through the survival, the miracle after miracle, and then sort of a spiritual awakening that these psychedelics help really provide, I have now just had my eyes opened, this interconnectedness, whatever you want to call that, God, divinity, the oneness, there's so many different takes on what that is. And I'm not here to judge whatever people want to call that or what their religious beliefs or spiritual thoughts are, but there is no doubt there is something else going on around us. And we only have five senses, and we kind of tend to disregard anything we can't perceive with those five senses. But there's so much going on around us we cannot perceive. But I have no doubt there is some magical goodness all around us.
I'm with you, man.
Some
100%.
love that connects us all, and it's powerful to see it and feel and even everything I've been through and all the hardship. It's just been a tool and a teacher to bring me to be who I am now, and I feel I really have a purpose in life to help serve others and share my message and maybe move this forward and move that massive needle in a different direction, even if it's just a smidge.
Is flying ever a possibility for you again, or is that opportunity gone because of the medical legal stuff?
It'd be a stretch. I'd have to go through a long process to get a lot of these things overturned, and then it would be up to the FAA to eventually, I don't know how long the waiver period is after being on psychotropic meds, but it's probably 5+ years that I could potentially, and honestly, I don't know that that's really where my heart's at anymore. That was
I understand.
Right?
I understand.
But I've been really enjoying the speaking, sort of doing the speaking events, the podcasting, the writing, and
how can people find you if they want to hire you to speak?
The easiest spot to find me on is I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Kegan Gill, which is Kegan. The last name's Gill, Gill. And you can also find me on Instagram at Kegan SMURF Gill, all one word. So please,
scrappy motherfucker, Gill.
I was waiting for like at Thanks Pharma.
Hey,
here's to you, Big Pharma.
Is your Instagram sponsored by Pharma? Is it sponsored by Pfizer?
Fortunately, not.
Do you remember years ago there was a movie called Orderlies with the Fat Boys? It's one of my favorite movies from when we were little kids. Right, the Fat Boys were like a rap group of these like fat dudes, and they were in a movie called Orderlies, and in it they were like dipshits that get this job to like go like work with this old guy, and they mess up and throw away all of his medication. And then all of a sudden he wakes up and he's like, I feel better. And he like went and lived his life and found out that like all the medication was making him sick and killing him. And then he takes the guy and it's like this, they have a good adventure. But like, I feels like this, like everybody I know, cause my buddy Kyle Turley, same thing. They gave him all these drugs. He wakes up naked in his closet with a gun and he's trying to figure out like, do I have to kill myself or do I have to tell my family I'm dead first? Like he's having this conversation in his head. And then he's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Yeah. And like, he just went cold turkey off everything and was like, I'm better now. Like I was like, they just kept giving every time he went in. I don't feel right. Here, take this, take this. The next thing you know, you're like naked in the closet with a gun.
Yeah. I was telling, sorry, I kept calling you Kegan. Kegan. I was telling Kegan.
How dare you pronounce my weird name wrong?
I know.
Kegan, like a keg and?
Yeah, don't come smurf me up, man. So I was telling him when I first met him, one of the most powerful experiences of my medical career was a medical retirement medical board like Kegan went through with a SEAL. And he's okay with me talking about this, as we've talked about it on podcast together. McCall Vega, who was
he's fucking awesome.
He's an awesome dude, and he has Vital Warrior organization. Yeah, and he's a good buddy of mine. But he came in my office. He was on 17 psychotropic medications. He had already had a stimulant-induced heart attack in his 40s. He was dark. He was moody. He was brooding. If there was ever anyone who's going to murder, suicide me, and it's like, this was the guy.
Yeah.
And he came to my office every damn day, and I was scared of him every damn day. And he came to my office for probably 6 months, and then he got out. And he was hating it. He was hating everything about his treatment. He was hating everything about how he was being treated at the military, the political process. He got out kind of against his will. And he just decided, you know what? A lot like Kegan, he's like, I'm not taking this anymore. And he literally threw away everything he was prescribed. He got on a plane. He flew to Peru. He met with a shaman. He lived with a shaman nude in the Amazon for 30 days, doing Kundalini yoga 8 hours a day. ayahuasca every third night. And then he comes back, and I saw him at, remember we used to have at Dick's Last Resort. We had those fundraisers every year for one of the foundations.
God damn it. I love Dick's Last Resort.
And he,
I love that place.
and he comes across, and he's sitting this far across from me with John. He comes up and he starts talking to me. And, you know, I'm the doctor for like 5,000 guys. So a lot of times I don't know who they are right away. And y'all know I'm with names. And who is he? And who is he? So I'm trying to get little cues. I talked to him for 45 minutes and I have no idea who he is.
Yeah.
And finally he said something and I went, his nickname used to be Hooch. And I was like,
Yep.
Hooch? And he goes,
Parsley?
who the fuck did you think I was? And I said, I have no idea. You still don't look like Hooch to
He's a
me.
completely
I'm
different
like,
person.
I don't know who you are. I cannot believe that's you. Everything about him looked different. His eyes were different. His voice was different. His
His
facial
energy.
expression, his energy.
Everything.
He had lost like 60 pounds. He was like completely unrecognizable. And so he tells me that story. And that was the only reason I ever considered psychedelics and plant medicines to be worth a shit. Like that's the only reason I ever even was willing to consider that a possibility. When then a few years later, I had that
Next thing you know, you were
problem
naked
with
in the
my
Amazon.
buddy, and I took the first SEAL down to retired, and he out of the service. Don't come after me. He was already out of service. We took him down to Mexico he was the first guy to do Ibogaine, which led to that, the vets program and all that.
That's right.
But that was purely because of McCall-Vig. And when I brought McCall-Vig in, because I told my buddy, I'm like, hey, I'll go down there with you, but I'm nervous. Like I've read that this kills people. Like there are people who have died from Ibogaine, and I don't know what to expect. And so there's this guy I know who's done ayahuasca, which is kind of similar. Let's bring him in. And my buddy didn't want anybody around, but I talked him into it. And then in the car ride down from the train station in San Diego to Rosarito, where the facility was,
Did you guys go to Puerto Nuevo?
they start talking, and I was like, hey, McCall, what's your real name again? And he's like, my
Hooch.
real name is McCall. I changed it
Hooch.
legally. And I said, all right, fucker. Like, what was
What
your
was
name
it?
before you changed it? And then he tells me, and he said, you know why I changed my name, right? And I said, no. And he said, it's a contraction of my swim buddy who died in Afghanistan, Michael Koch. And so it's McCall. And my buddy looks up at him and he goes, I repatriated Michael Koch. So he had escorted him back
Jesus.
to his family, hometown, through his funerals, all his services. And I was like, oh, that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, just randomly, just random. Yeah.
I
So
met-
did this disappoint anybody? Is this the most amazing story you've ever heard?
That's,
Well,
uh,
no, I mean, it's
incredible, man.
You know,
Yeah, thanks,
we were
Kegan,
talking
for
about
sharing.
like, Viktor Frankl and that. I mean, like, this is like an amazing, triumph of humanity. I feel so sad that one, that he had to go through this, and two, that the people, you go fight for this country and you enter into this kind of pool to do these things, and then something negative happens, and all of a sudden you're thrust into like this system that is so broken that there's no way out, and then somehow you found your way out of it. It's like I mean, it's
another miracle.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
miracle.
it's
It's a triumph. But like, the whole time I'm listening to it, I'm just thinking like, how many more of these vets are in this situation that don't get out? And then I'm like thinking, how do we go help these people?
Right.
And like, it starts giving me like, I don't know if you noticed, like I start having anxiety thinking about like, and and I'm not an anxious person anyway, but thinking like if this is standard of care and it's breaking and killing and destroying these people, and yet these guys have fought for our country and they come back and, we don't take care of our broken soldiers. Like, fuck, man, like that.
It's inspiring, depressing, depressing, like the whole cycle
Fuck, it's a whole
of this whole
gamut.
thing,
When I got out of the Navy, I had gone to the VA, did my out processing, and then moved on. And like 6 weeks later, I get a huge box in the mail that I wasn't expecting from the VA. I open it up, and it's just a shitload of pills.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't ask for them. I don't know what they were. I got no education
What were they?
on them.
This is what we give.
What were they?
we
You
give
just got like
your
your parting gift, like, and here are your pills.
Yeah, it was just all kinds of shit. And I looked at the box. I just immediately threw it away because I'd heard already enough stories. But, the number of just buddies or acquaintances, teammates that I know who have committed suicide, 100% of them have been taking pharmaceuticals.
100% of them.
So step one is we need to hold these pharma companies fucking accountable. they are the ones that are causing this problem because they're in charge of education. They're the ones pumping these meds into the system, not just the military system, but everywhere else. I look at, my parents.
If you were paying attention, those motherfuckers just took over the entire country for 2 years. So I'm not sure how we're going to beat those dudes.
Dude, it's the same in the NFL. I mean, so when I moved, I had this like huge glass jar. It's about this big. And when they would give me drugs or pills at the NFL, I would just throw them in the jar. And I've actually moved the jar around every time we move because I don't know what to do with all these pills.
Don't flush them down the toilet.
No, don't flush them down the toilet. I don't want to so they're in this thing. And periodically, I remember somebody
just reach in and take one and see what happens.
No, I just randomly just take it. But I've had people be like, "Hey, do you have any painkiller?" And I'm like,
probably.
Look in this magical jar.
Take a handful of candy.
I've told you that observationally, and I remember I pitched this at Peter at TIA and he shit on it, which just talks about the fact that he doesn't have the intellectual capacity to understand this. That observationally, the guys that took the most amount of painkillers seem to have the most amount of problems today in the for former NFL players.
Right.
And so my whole thing was like, if pills are how you get through this, when you get out the other side, it's not a good solution. So you have to find a way like prolotherapy and other things to manage
psychedelics.
This. And like the psychedelic thing, I mean, Aaron Rodgers is on Joe Rogan talking about,
shit. Like he was missing sunlight and exercise and nutrition
those are just basic.
And sleep. And I mean, Jesus, if we could get that under control.
Well, think about it. And he's also in Michigan, which is like,
you're in Virginia when you're in the psych ward, is that right?
No, I had moved back to Michigan, so that all went down in Michigan. But
like the desperate part of Michigan in a trash bag, dressed as like fucking Superman, with like clumps of his hair missing, trying to go out and fight crime. You didn't hear that part? I'm like picturing you like nuded up, shaved up, with like a trash bag for a cape, being like, dun, dun, dun. I'm like, holy shit. And then I'm thinking to myself, like, has anybody ever done a study on the interaction of all these drugs? Because
it's impossible. It's impossible because the interactions are dependent upon the physiology of the person. And the dosage and the timing. It's impossible.
But that's the crazy part. But then how can some guy with wire rim set up say, "Oh, that's standard of care," when it's not?
It's just like it's just like the COVID response. It was consensus science. It's like a board of our elders got together and decided this is what we're going to do, and that's the way medicine's run right now.
Sally, this problem is more widespread than just the military. It's the whole healthcare industry is just
the entire system. Doc? What do you think licensure has gotten to the point where it is now a limitation to good care? I mean, should we eliminate the requirement for licensure to practice medicine?
You can't eliminate it, but it needs to go back to its original inception. So what the medical licensure used to be was that you went through medical school and you learned an adequate amount of information. You mastered the material enough to be eligible for a medical license. So as I was saying earlier, the pharmaceutical, super quickly, this is wave top, we can do a podcast on it later, but the pharmaceutical industry provides about 90% of all the research dollars. The research dollars leads to the research at the premier institutions. The premier institutions are the ones that are dictating medical curricula, right? The curricula is essentially dictated by the pharmaceutical industry in a sense, because that's what people know about, because that's what they're researching. And so every single medical school in the entire country has to have the exact same number of hours of every type of education. Like there's like every single one of them. And so we all have the exact same amount of time behind the microscope. We have the exact same time studying pharmacology. We have the exact same time doing anatomy. All of that stuff is dictated nationally. Then when you finish medical school, during medical school, and so there's 3 steps along the way, but you take these United States medical licensing exam, which is what it should be, because it's a United States medical education. And then you take this United States medical licensing exam, and then you have to go out to each state and get your license in that state, and that state has its own requirements. And so I have 4 different licenses, or I'm working on getting one back and getting a 4th one, and every state's different. They all want different CMEs. They want different, training, this and that. And it's a way to have local control over what your physicians do. It's just like a law license or a permit to build or something like that. It's like, we want local control over what you do. And so you go outside the local control, they're going to crush you. So what we need is, if we had a United States board, right? If you had a United States license, well, then somebody in your state would have to get up to the federal level to try to crack down on you for giving vitamin IVs, as opposed to some local hospital talking to some local representative that could cause trouble for you, So that's one way. But the other thing we need to do is revamp the educational process, because doctors don't understand health. They're called healthcare providers. They're disease care providers. So if you don't have a disease, a doctor doesn't have anything for you.
Disease reaction providers.
Right. So that was my problem in the SEAL teams. When everybody came and told me their problems, nobody had a disease. There wasn't a single disease. But none of them
venereal disease. SEALs.
None of them were performing how they wanted to perform, and I had to figure out, okay, well, how do I make people perform better without giving them drugs? And so, I had to really relearn and understand the stuff that you would think a doctor would know.
You got to educate yourself the right way.
Yeah,
on holistic care.
Kegan, we want to hold you up. Our podcast is just about over, brother. You have anything else for us? I mean, it's still a fascinating story. I want to offer, you've got my number. If there's anything I can ever do for you.
Was there any determining factor? I still am kind of blown away by the terminal velocity to eject is 200 miles an hour, and you were at 700. Was there any, was there any reasoning, or was there any thought of why you survived? Because I would imagine getting ejected at that, you should have been just ripped into a billion pieces.
You would have been ripped into millions of pieces.
Maybe
smaller, more compact, the seats protecting you more, the limbs are in as long.
Okay, I buy it. So if the fact that he was a little dude in the seat, it just helped absorb the blow.
I think. I don't know. What do you think, Kegan?
Yeah, I mean, it was miracle after miracle, really. I don't know if it's any one thing. It just all came together. Freaking miracle is all I can think.
We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
For people out there that are struggling, military, civilian, whatever you do, there is no doubt a mental health crisis in our country. And if you want to start to take control of that and start to improve, there's things that you can do that you don't have to have a special license. You don't have to have any special equipment. Probably the most baseline thing is just drinking clean water, eating real food, not eating stuff that's got 37 ingredients that you can't pronounce in it.
Yeah.
Eating
what your grandparents called food.
Yeah. I mean, these are all the things our grandma and grandpa probably told us, a little regular exercise, get some sunlight, be compassionate, love other people, and do things that maximize your sleep, minimizing or reducing alcohol, I did
not pay him to say that, by the way.
Have a cup. If you like a cup of coffee, cool. But if you drink coffee all day, that's going to jack up your sleep. There's all these little things that you can do if you're having troubles that are going to get your sleep back on track. That once you start sleeping and your body's not in this state of chronic inflammation from all the crap that's in our diets and our foods and lifestyle stressors and all these things we do to ourselves, your body can heal itself in so many ways. And it doesn't take freaking pills. It doesn't take really anything other than just having the will to start making some changes in your life. Can unlock.
Get out of the way. Get out of the way of the healing. Yeah.
And
man, super appreciate your time. When that book gets closer, let us know. Between us, we have a ton of influential friends. We'd love to get you on podcast and help you promote this. And if there's anything we can ever do to help you with your recovery or any programs you got going on, you got my number. I'm always down to help.
Thanks, Doc. And thank you guys for your time and helping to get the word out about this kind of stuff. It's pretty incredible to see Men's Journal doing this kind of work now. Gives me hope. this stuff's getting into.
Well,
the
we don't know how long they're going to let us do it, but we're trying. We're going to get as much in as we can.
Yeah, we're going to keep going until they eject us to 700 miles an hour.
Yeah, I do think psychedelics have entered the mainstream now officially. I think it's there. If you're not on board, you're late to the party. But psychedelics are the answer for a lot of people for mental health and having a new awakening, like many of us have.
Well, but also finding alternative forms of care. I mean, like the hyperbarics. You know, some of the other modalities. Like, I mean, you're bringing your prolotherapy.
Breath work.
I'm like 1850 called. They want their medicine back. I mean, you know, prolotherapy. You know, and
stellate ganglion blocks, transcranial magnets. You know, just freaking nature.
Well,
being
I'm in
outside,
nature. Well, like I'm testing that
plant
sono deal with the like the magnet helmets.
Yeah.
You know,
saunas, cold baths. Like, there's so much out there. So much out there. You know, the
peptides and biologics.
The NuX, which you were using out here with Vance, right? Like, you know, muscle reprogramming. You know, there's so much out there to help. None of this is traditional care. None of it's going to be covered by the VA for 20 years.
Well, but
so
the problem is
what we're doing now is like the best we can do is just to keep pushing one guy by guy. Like, you know, if we can help Kegan, he helps another guy, and he helps another guy, and you know, maybe in our lives we make a difference
one step at a time.
There is some hope in the VA. I know some guys down in Arizona that have been actually been able to receive ketamine therapy. So the VA is starting to get on board with psychedelics, and I really, I mean, and again, it's just one tool, and if you just go do a bunch of psychedelics and don't change anything in your lifestyle, it might not do a lot for you. But
my concern is that they won't have the expertise to use it, even though they'll have the ability to use it. But you know, anything is better than what we have going. So baby steps, like any progress I'll take. Anybody else got any saved rounds, alibis, anything you want to throw out?
That's great, man. Well, dude, thank you so much, and dude, best of luck, man. Like,
great.
Just
amazing
like
story,
fucking
man.
Virtual high five.
Thanks for sharing, bro.
Yeah, you made us all feel like sissies, by the way.
Yeah.
Like,
no, I would have been dead.
None of us have any problems. Like, our lives are perfect.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate you, brother.
Likewise.
All right,
see you.
Thanks, Kegan.
That's it.
If it was a movie,